Let me tell you how Betty turned my father's house into her personal Disney castle, and I was the unwanted Cinderella she'd been plotting to banish since day one. Betty Martinez had this incredible talent for making my life miserable while maintaining her perfect stepmother facade. She'd accidentally knock my dinner onto the kitchen floor, claiming she didn't see me there. She'd dump her coffee grounds and banana peels directly into my bedroom trash can, saying she was just trying to help with chores. The worst incident was when she replaced my head and shoulders shampoo with actual superglue. I nearly went bald before I realized what she'd done. But the moment Dad walked into any room, Betty transformed into June Cleaver incarnate. She'd brush off every complaint I made with a sweet laugh. "Oh Ronald, Kelly's just being dramatic. You know how teenage girls can be." Dad, bless his heart, believed every word because Betty had perfected the art of gaslighting with a smile. She'd bake his favorite chocolate chip cookies while I was at school, leaving me none, then tell him I'd eaten them all when he asked. She'd volunteer to do my laundry, then shrink my favorite sweaters and blame the washing machine. Every cruel act was disguised as an accident or my own fault, and Dad never saw through her performance. The manipulation was so subtle, so perfectly executed, that I started questioning my own sanity. Was I really being too sensitive? Was Betty actually trying to help, and I was just ungrateful? Looking back, I realized she was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to isolate me from my father's affections while positioning herself as the victim of my teenage rebellion. But Betty made one critical mistake. She underestimated how much my father actually loved me, and how well he knew her true nature. That mistake would cost her everything. The mask started slipping the moment Dad got his diagnosis, stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Betty saw opportunity where I saw tragedy, and she moved fast to separate us when we needed each other most. First, she convinced Dad to skip my graduation from Lincoln High School. "Ronald, honey, all that excitement and emotion might be too much stress for your heart," she cooed, rubbing his shoulders while I stood there in my cap and gown. "Dr. Harrison specifically said you need to avoid overwhelming situations." That same weekend, while I walked across the stage alone, Betty posted Instagram photos from their romantic getaway to Napa Valley, complete with heart emojis and #BlessedLife hashtags. When my acceptance letter arrived from Northwestern University with a partial academic scholarship, I was over the moon. I'd worked my butt off for 4 years to make this happen. But Betty saw dollar signs, not dreams. She sat Dad down for one of her concerned family meetings about our finances. "Ronald, sweetheart, I've been going over our budget, and with these medical bills piling up, I just don't see how we can afford Kelly's college expenses," she said, spreading bank statements across the kitchen table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Maybe she should consider community college for the first 2 years? It's the responsible thing to do." Dad looked exhausted and defeated, nodding along as Betty painted this picture of financial ruin. What she didn't mention was the 2 brand new Coach purses sitting in her closet, $800 each, that she'd bought that same week. Or the weekly spa appointments she'd scheduled for stress management. Apparently, my education was a luxury we couldn't afford, but her designer therapy was essential. I watched my dreams crumble while Betty played the role of the practical, caring stepmother who was just looking out for our family's best interests. The woman who'd never worked a day since marrying my father was suddenly our financial advisor, and Dad was too sick and tired to see through her lies. But the real cruelty was still coming, and it would make everything else look like child's play. The real cruelty came when Dad entered Sunset Manor Hospice Care. Betty appointed herself as his primary caregiver and medical advocate, which gave her terrifying power over his final days, and over my access to him. "Kelly darling, your father needs his rest," Betty would say, blocking the doorway to Dad's room like a bouncer at an exclusive club. "Dr. Peterson says too many visitors can be overwhelming for terminal patients. I think 15 minutes every other day is plenty, don't you?" Meanwhile, she'd spend entire afternoons camped out in his room, sometimes bringing her book club friends to chat loudly in the hallway about their latest romance novel. During my brief, supervised visits, I'd find Dad barely conscious but still trying to squeeze my hand. Betty would hover nearby, checking her Apple Watch and tapping her foot impatiently. "Time's up, sweetheart. He needs to save his energy for physical therapy." Physical therapy for a man who could barely lift his head? The lies were becoming more obvious, but the staff believed her because she was listed as his medical proxy. The worst part was catching her in Dad's room with a stack of legal documents spread across his bedside table. She'd lean over his bed, guiding his shaking hand to sign paper after paper while he drifted in and out of consciousness. When I asked what she was having him sign, Betty's perfect smile never wavered. "Oh, sweetheart, these are just boring grown-up things like medical directives and insurance forms," she said, quickly shuffling the papers into her designer tote bag. "You're too young to understand responsibilities like estate planning and property management. These are conversations for adults." I tried staying overnight once, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair just to be near Dad. At 2 a.m., Betty burst in with 2 security guards, claiming I was disturbing other patients by making noise. I'd been sitting silently, holding Dad's hand while he slept. But Betty was convincing, and I was escorted out like a troublemaker. She was systematically cutting me off from my dying father, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Or so I thought. The morning after Dad's funeral, while I was still wearing my black dress from the service and hadn't even finished my coffee, Betty waltzed into the kitchen like she'd just won the lottery. She was jangling the house keys like a jailer, and her grief performance from yesterday had completely vanished. "Kelly, sweetie, we need to have a little chat about your living situation," she announced, settling into Dad's favorite chair at the breakfast table, Mom's antique oak table that had been in our family for 3 generations. "This house belongs to me now, and honestly, I think it's time you spread your wings and found your own place." She slid a formal eviction notice across the table, already filled out in her perfect cursive handwriting and dated the day after the funeral. She'd prepared this before Dad was even in the ground. "I'm giving you 30 days, which is more generous than I need to be," Betty continued, examining her manicured nails like we were discussing the weather. "And frankly, dear, you're a reminder of a past I'd rather leave behind. Ronald and I had our own life together, and it's time I moved forward without complications." What broke my heart wasn't the eviction notice, it was seeing her sitting there in my mother's kitchen, wearing my mother's pearl necklace and ruby earrings, calling me a reminder of the past. This woman had spent 3 years systematically erasing me from my father's life, and now she was literally erasing me from my childhood home. I stared at Betty Martinez, this woman who'd played the loving stepmother while poisoning every relationship I had, and something cold and calculating settled in my chest. She wanted a competition about who belonged in this house? Fine. I wouldn't just participate, I would demolish her. I smiled back sweetly and said, "We'll see about that." The confidence in her eyes flickered for just a moment, and I knew she was wondering what I meant. She should have been worried. She should have been terrified. Because I was about to destroy her entire world in less than 24 hours. I spent the next 24 hours strategically digging through every document Dad had ever given me, and that's when I remembered the manila envelope he'd handed me 2 years ago, the one marked Kelly, open only if absolutely necessary in his careful block letters. I'd tucked that envelope away in my memory box and honestly forgotten about it. Dad had been acting strange that day, more serious than usual, and he'd made me promise to keep it safe but not open it unless something terrible happened. At 17, I thought he was being overly dramatic. Now I realized he'd been preparing for war. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and found 3 life-changing documents inside, along with a letter in Dad's handwriting that made my blood run cold. "Kelly, if you're reading this, it means Betty has shown her true colors and I'm no longer here to protect you. I've been watching her behavior for the past year, and I know exactly what kind of person she is. I've seen how she treats you when she thinks I'm not looking, and I've documented everything. These papers will give you the power to fight back. Use them wisely. I love you more than life itself. Dad." The first document was a deed transfer signed and notarized, showing that Dad had quietly transferred the house into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary, dated 2 years ago, right after Betty's mask had started slipping around him too. The second was a prenuptial agreement that Betty had signed, limiting her to only the personal property she'd brought into the marriage plus 1 vehicle. She'd been so eager to marry Dad that she'd signed away any claim to his assets. The third was a notarized statement from Dr. Williams, Dad's longtime physician, confirming that Ronald Thompson was of completely sound mind and under no duress when he created the trust and made these legal arrangements. Betty was so confident in her manipulation that she'd never seen this coming. She thought she'd played the perfect game, but Dad had been playing chess while she was playing checkers. I spent hours organizing the documents, highlighting the relevant sections, and preparing for the most satisfying conversation of my life. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where Betty was sipping coffee from Mom's favorite mug and scrolling through real estate listings on her iPad, probably planning to sell the house before my 30 days were up. "Betty," I said, setting my own coffee down and taking the seat across from her. "You were absolutely right yesterday. Someone definitely needs to move out of this house." She looked up with that smug smile, thinking I was about to beg for more time or negotiate some pathetic deal. "I'm so glad you're being mature about this, Kelly. I knew you'd come around and see reason." "Oh, I see everything very clearly now," I replied, placing the deed on the table between us. "This is my house. It has been for 2 years. Betty's expression shifted from smug to confused to absolutely horrified as she snatched the paper and read it frantically. Her hands shook as she processed the legal language, her face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. "This can't be right," she whispered, reading the same paragraph over and over. "I was his wife. I have rights. This is impossible." "You have rights," I agreed, sliding the prenuptial agreement across the table with the relevant sections highlighted in bright yellow. "You have the right to the personal property you brought into the marriage, plus that Honda Accord Dad bought you last Christmas. That's it. Betty's coffee mug crashed to the floor as she grabbed the prenup with both hands, scanning the document that she'd signed so carelessly 3 years ago. The legal terminology was clear and brutal. She was entitled to nothing from Dad's estate except what she'd specifically brought into the marriage. "You little bitch," she hissed, her perfect stepmother mask finally completely shattered. "You've been planning this the whole time, haven't you? Playing the innocent stepdaughter while plotting behind my back." I shook my head calmly. "I didn't plan anything, Betty. Dad planned this. He knew exactly what kind of person you are, and he protected me from you even after death." She stood up so violently that her chair crashed backward. "I'll contest this. I'll hire the best lawyers in Chicago. There's no way this will hold up in court." That's when I pulled out the final document, Dr. Williams' notarized statement confirming Dad's mental competency when he'd created the trust. "Go ahead and try," I said, meeting her furious gaze. "But you'll need to do it from somewhere else. I want you out of my house by tomorrow evening. And honestly, Betty, that's more generous than you deserve." Betty started crying, ugly manipulative sobs that she'd probably used to get her way her entire life. Within seconds, she was wailing about family loyalty and Christian forgiveness, playing every emotional card in her deck. "Where will I even go, Kelly? I gave up everything for your father. I have nowhere to turn," she sobbed, reaching for my hands like we were long-lost sisters instead of mortal enemies. "Surely we can work something out? I'll be a better stepmother, I promise." But I was already on my phone, calling Anderson Locksmith to schedule an emergency rekey for that afternoon. "Hi, this is Kelly Thompson at 847 Maple Street. I need all my locks changed today." "Yes, it's an emergency situation." Betty's sobs turned to rage as she realized I wasn't falling for her performance. "You can't do this to me. What would your father think? What would your precious mother think about you throwing family out on the street?" "My mother would think I'm finally standing up for myself," I replied, watching the locksmith's van pull into our driveway. "And Dad? Dad orchestrated this whole thing. He knew you'd show your true colors the moment he was gone." By 6 o'clock that evening, Betty's designer luggage was stacked on the front lawn like an upscale yard sale. She stood in the driveway screaming about family values and Christian charity while our neighbors watched from their windows like it was premium cable television. "This isn't over, Kelly," she shrieked, loading her coach bags into her Honda. "I'll take you to court. I'll expose what a manipulative little witch you really are. Everyone will know the truth." "The truth?" I called back from the front porch. "The truth is that you married a dying man for his money, tortured his daughter for 3 years, and thought you were smart enough to get away with it. How'd that work out for you, Betty?" She screamed profanities that would make a sailor blush, cursing both me and Dad's memory, before peeling out of the driveway in a cloud of burning rubber and wounded pride. The next morning, I found her eviction notice in the recycling bin and had it professionally framed. It now hangs in my home office as a reminder that sometimes the universe delivers perfect justice. You just have to be patient enough to let it unfold. Betty told me to find my own place. Turns out, I already had one.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.